Hey, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, I hear we have a young one.
Yeah, that's mine. That's why I mute most of the time.
That's cute. Hey, Grant, how are you?
Doing good, Dennis. Sorry, I'm making a cup of coffee real quick.
Man, it's late for coffee. It's almost time for lunch. What are you talking about?
Ooh, I don't know when you eat lunch, Dennis, but
I live on a farm, buddy.
when do you usually wake up?
Usually about 5:30, something like that. It's just a habit over the years.
Yeah.
When I was in college, I usually woke up at, noon.
The only reason I get up before noon is to see you, Dennis.
Oh, aren't you sweet? Turn you into a contributing member of society, the last thing I do. Okay, let's see here. My internet's a little quirky this morning. Hopefully it won't die out on me.
Is that what happened yesterday?
Apparently, I didn't even realize it until afterwards. I thought everyone was just giving me the cold shoulder. Everyone was frozen. I said, okay, well, goodbye.
Oh,
How long was it frozen?
Grant, how long did we wait? Four minutes?
So you weren't even frozen, Dennis. You literally like left the group. So I would say we waited probably 4 minutes to have you like join, but you must have just been frozen on your end. But
yeah, the whole screen was frozen. I couldn't, no one was responding. I couldn't click on anything.
yeah,
So I just gave up.
that was weird because that happened to me too. I got kicked out like 10 or 15 minutes before you, and you let me back in, Dennis.
Huh.
But
Well, sorry about that, everybody. I didn't mean to be rude, but it was so strange. I'm like, what is going on here? Like I've never had, normally the system tells me if it's got a bad connection or whatever, it throws up a little note, your internet connection is unstable. But yesterday it said you are unstable. So I didn't know what to say, So I didn't argue, Did you guys see any of the videos? Okay.
Yeah, this was your closing statement when you were finishing up, winding up the class, the last thing we went through. And then you went along and then you just went, the screen went black and it went bloop. And I was like, uh-oh, well.
Huh. Well, you never know with this stuff, right? It's almost as good as the dog ate my homework. It's in that same league, it seems like. So, okay, well, hopefully we have a few folks. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So let me share my screen, and hopefully I won't freeze today. Okay, let's see here. Sorry. Let me, hopefully this will work. Okay. There we go. Okay. Did anybody want, since we got frozen out, did anybody want to ask questions about yesterday or any thoughts about the customer interviews?
No, but it was extremely helpful on my end with a lot of the markets that we're doing now. This would be perfect time to engage and have that one-on-one conversation, to have those open-ended questions. So no, this is perfect timing for me, and I appreciate this.
Good. In entrepreneur circles, this whole area, which they call customer discovery, they actually put, in my own opinion, it's way too much emphasis. There are some programs where this is like 2/3 of the content. And I think that's great if you're a true startup, but very few of our participants are actually true startups in that sense. So I have not made it as big a deal, but I do think that I've seen some questions on Facebook from some past participants asking, should they set up an advisory board or a board of directors or stuff like that. This is really what you should do in the beginning, is talk to potential customers, and I think even bribing them makes sense. So where you give them a coupon or something for helping you. And it's also a chance to ask them, hey, is there anyone else that I could ask these questions to, like your spouse or your friend, or, and you might find yourself in a like a little group that has a bunch of members. It could be a church, it could be a neighborhood. So this technique of engaging with either customers or potential customers really has a lot of potential. And even though I kind of gloss over it, because I feel like there's other stuff you all need to concentrate on, since you already are up and running and you already have customers. But I'm happy to, to talk about that at any time. Okay, so what we're going to start with is this one here. And let's see if we can make it big.
Yeah, there's a worksheet for everything. And yes, I have another worksheet here. And this is now around jobs to be done. To me, the most powerful thing to get to with your empathy interviews, distill it down into an empathy map so you can see the patterns, and then synthesize it down into a job to be done. So I've got a worksheet that goes through this. I'll explain what this worksheet is in a minute, but I want to give an example. So recently I was tasked with the job of putting handles on cabinets. So that was our cabinets, and I needed to put that thing on a cabinet, and it didn't have it on there before. Now the interesting thing about this is we were about ready to sell our house. We knew our kitchen was a little bit dated, and the belief was if we put these magic handles on our cabinets, the house will be worth so much more. So that's the challenge I was given. I'm a bit of a handy person, so I was like, oh, I can do that. So now I want to walk you through how to think about a job to be done. So for me, what progress was I trying to make? That's the first question you answer, and you try to answer it both functional, social, and emotional. So remember the interview that just happened here. Digging into not just the functional components of what's going on, but the social and emotional. So for me, I felt pressure to put a perfect hole in a hardwood cabinet to get the most value when we sell our house. So that's the progress that I was trying to make. I had the pulls, but the screws on them were a little bit odd. So the situation I was in is the hole I need is an odd sized. It was slightly bigger than the bit that I had and slightly smaller than the other bit that I had. And I have to get it right the first time. That situation was super, super important here. I have one chance to drill this hole, and if I screw it up, it materially affects the value of our house. That was the challenge. The obstacles, I didn't have the correct size drill bit. I couldn't make the exact sized hole that I needed to make. The workarounds, I could have used a slightly larger bit, and maybe it would have rolled around, not been quite snug on there. And that bit was fairly old, so I was like, I don't know if this is going to make a great hole. I mean, I could use it if I had to, but did I mention that I have to get this right the first time I drill it, and I only get one shot? And then the trade-offs, the value and the trade-offs. So the pulls were about 100 times more expensive than the drill bit that I could buy. So the cost of a new bit is inconsequential. And I could hire somebody to do the whole job for me. That's a trade-off that I could have. But the value of that perfect hole was paramount to me. So then you pull down these statements into a sentence. So for me, my job to be done was, I feel pressure to put a perfect hole in a hardwood cabinet to get the most value when we sell our house. The hole I need is an odd size. It's in really hardwood, and I have to get it right the first time. I don't have the correct size drill bit. I could use a slightly larger bit that's fairly old. And the pulls were 100 times more expensive than the drill bit, so the cost of a new bit is inconsequential to me. I could hire somebody to do the whole job for me, but I like doing it myself. So that's what I was doing when I thought about putting these these pulls on the cabinet. Then I think about the flow of money and attention going through each job here. So for me, it was more emotional currency than actual currency. I had to get it right. I didn't want to disappoint the people in my family, and I was under pressure. We got to sell our house pretty quickly. So the question here, and the key thing to pay attention to, is what job will your customers hire you to do for them? And when you figure that out, and you figure out their language around that, amazing things happen to your ability to build the product people want, and more importantly, take that product to market in an effective way. So let's go on the journey here. So the solution, drill bits. So I go to the store, and I'm looking at the drill bits. Now think, what is my job to be done here? I need to not screw up putting a hole of exactly a certain size, which is kind of a goofy size, into hardwood. And now I'm shopping for the perfect bit to put that perfect hole in my cabinet. And I look at this and I'm thinking, okay, well, this has a 135-degree split point. Well, I don't know what that means. It lasts 6 times longer. I only have to drill about 30 holes. It's made out of titanium. I'm like, okay, is titanium hard metal? Where does it rank in brittle and strength? It's kind of a pretty color. Well, maybe I should pick that one. Or I could pick these. Well, it starts 10 times faster. What does that even mean? Like, do I care about how fast the bit starts? It's got all the goofy sizes I need, which is good. It's got 3 flattened shanks on it. I have no idea if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Apparently that means the chuck won't slip. What's the chuck again? I'm trying to remember. What the heck is the chuck? Do I want these? They look kind of pretty. And then I'm like, well, I could go with these and spend a little bit less money. They still have that 135-degree split point, so maybe that must be a good thing for a drill bit. I don't know exactly. And hey, these have cool black oxide coating. That must be cool. That must be valuable. So notice the amazing mismatch here between the job to be done. I need a perfect hole. I need it drilled perfectly the first time, and it's in hardwood. And all I get when I go to the store is description after description. And Turbo Max, what the hell's Turbo Max? I don't even know what Turbo Max is. Like, I'm not hiring a Turbo Max. I'm hiring this to make a good hole. And none of this tells me, is this thing gonna make a great hole for me? So there's a huge mismatch between how they're taking these drill bits to market and the job to be done that I have as I'm standing here trying to figure out which one of these to buy. There's a high likelihood you are doing this today to your customers. Your websites, your go-to-market is probably all it's talking about is your solution, your 135-degree split bit, your extra keyless chuck, your 10 times faster start. But none of this speaks to what I actually need. I need a great hole in a piece of hardwood. So be sure and align your go-to-market with the job to be done and the language of your customer. And the funny thing is, if one of those bits said, we drill a perfect hole guaranteed the first time in hardwood, and it was 10 times more expensive than the other bits, I would have bought it. Because the bit was a very, very small fraction of the overall cost of what I was doing. But yet, they bombarded me with all these buzzwords about how great the bit was. Now, one that was doing it right, I noticed just to the right of the drill bits are the jigsaw blades. So I pick up this Bosch one. It makes a clean cut in wood. Awesome. That helps me. And I love the little symbol on the back. You've got a turtle and a rabbit. Awesome. This bit cuts about medium speed, and it's good for finished wood. Finished wood's on the right, rough wood's on the left. So I know this is a medium speed bit that's going to help me cut through finished wood, nearly finished wood. Awesome. Because what do I want to do with the jigsaw bit? I want to cut a piece of wood off. This helps me understand, is this the right kind of bit for the wood that I have? And how fast is the thing going to work for me? Much more aligned with the job to be done. Much better go to market off these jigsaw. I wish the drill bits would have done the same thing. Ultimately here though, what our goal is to go from some hunch to evidence. So as we think about all these empathy interviews, all the jobs to be done, fundamentally you have a hunch about what's going to be successful in your business. And as fast as possible, you're trying to fill in the evidence. So tactically, what does this mean? It means starting out with a lean canvas, a business model canvas, a value proposition canvas, some description of your understanding of your business, then identifying the key obstacles, opportunities, unknowns, and risks associated with your business right now. Enumerate those out, figure out the ones that have the highest likelihood of killing you or have the highest likelihood of dramatic upside in your business, and then think about running experiments. What we talked about today was the simplest, fastest experiment you can run, which is to interview somebody. Build empathy, potentially test some of your problem statements with open-ended questions and feel what's coming back. And then ultimately that leads to evidence. Because if you're building your business solely on guesses, like right now you've got a lot of guesses and that's totally normal and fine. But to scale your business, you have to replace those guesses with evidence about what's going to work and what's not going to work. That allows you to stop doing the things that are not working and amplify the things that are working. And that's how you navigate or find your way from where you're at today to a business that's going to work. One of the ways to do this with the scientific method is run an experiment. So even when you run an experiment, a lot of times, and this comes from the lean startup movement, the build, measure, learn loop, I think it's missing a really critical piece, which is the frame step. So if you study the scientific method, the first thing you do in the scientific method is research. Well, this is human research. Build empathy. Write down your hunch or your hypothesis, and then document it. And document it can be as simple as just write it on a napkin, write it on a sticky note. The key is to write it down. Then build, run the experiment, collect the data, and then learn from the data that you received. Now, our brains are wired in such a way that makes this hard. Daniel Kahneman discovered a really fun bias called the hindsight bias. This is a great defense mechanism in our lives. So what the hindsight bias is that our brains trick us into thinking whatever happens is about what was supposed to happen. It allows us not to be surprised by everything we do in life. But this hindsight bias robs us from our ability to learn because of this. If our brains distort us around what we expect will happen to what actually happened, we don't give ourselves this chance to live in the gap between what we expect and what actually happened. And that gap between those two things is learning. So simply writing down what you think will happen gives you the chance after it happens, after you run your experiment or after you do the work, to check up and say, what's different about what I expected and what actually happened? So notice this in goal setting. We have you write down your goals. The reason we do that is so a week later you're not able to stand there and go, yeah, we did about what I expected would happen. You've got the explicit statement you made a week ago that you check up with what actually happened, and it's not for punishment, it's not to make you look silly. The reason that exists is so that you can sit here in the middle and go, what did we learn from that gap? The goal in entrepreneurship, especially at the early stages, is to maximize your learning. Learn as fast as you can, as completely as you can. So if we draw this out, this comes from knowledge theory. If you have your probability of expected result over a number of experiment runs on the bottom, and you have your ability to learn or the strength of your learning, the sweet spot, ironically, is at 50%. So half the time, you should be getting an unexpected result to maximize your learning. Now, this doesn't mean you blow something up half the time, because these have to be experiments that are safe to run. But half the time, when you hear that experiment, you get those results, you should be going, why did it go that way? And if you find over a long run of experiments that you never get the results you expect, you need to build more empathy. Your hypothesis isn't framed in a way that's even close to the reality of the situation. So build more empathy to frame a more accurate hypothesis into whatever you're trying to explore. Usually that's the case with early stage startups. With later stage startups and big companies, usually what happens is you run a bunch of experiments, you get the results you expected time and time and time again, you high-five each other and go, man, we are getting so good at running experiments. But all you're doing is wasting a bunch of time, a bunch of money, with the overhead of running an experiment just to get the results you expected. You're basically wasting money proving stuff you already know. So there, think about more safety, to push yourself more into an environment where the results that you get will not necessarily be what you expect. This is where, when markets shift, this is the hardest thing for big companies to do. All the infrastructure of most companies is your goal in life is to predict the future and hit it within 0.5%. That is the playbook for big companies. So if the market shifts, if a lot of uncertainty gets introduced into the marketplace, big companies aren't able to learn. Their rate of learning is down here. So please, as a startup, make sure your rate of learning is higher. And the way you do that is to push yourself for about half the time to get unexpected results. So why does all this matter? Let's kind of bring this home into why you should care about this. Pull versus push. So long ago, when we took products to market, really popularized by consumer brands in the 50s and 60s, you could push a product into market. You could spend tons of marketing money. You could saturate every place an eyeball or an ear lived, newspapers, TV, radio, and you could bombard the market with your message. You could push it onto them. And they really had no choice but accept what you pushed onto them. Is that the case today? Can you blanket your marketing budget into about 7 locations and be 100% saturated in your market? It's probably the opposite. There's probably 1 million places you could place your go-to-market dollars. And so now we're in a market environment where you have to create pull. You can't push your message onto people. You have to create excitement through understanding and language that resonates with people, imagery that resonates, and a product that resonates to get that pull from the market and people coming to you. If you find that you're trying to push your message onto people and it's not working, you probably haven't done your homework to figure out the job to be done for your customer. Do the empathy work. Do the jobs to be done definition. If you have language that resonates, people will begin pulling the product out of your hands. That's when you know you've got your go-to-market and your product well-tuned. So if you're sitting around asking yourself the question, do we have product market fit? You don't have it yet. Because you have product market fit when you don't have time to ask yourself that question. And the best way to get to product market fit early on is doing the empathy interviews and then eventually building a product and a go-to-market strategy that satisfies the job to be done for your customers. And as we think about doing these empathy interviews, again, think about the continuum of questions that we saw here. So on one side, you can ask questions that confirm your beliefs. And on the other side, you can ask questions that refute your beliefs. Empathy interviews start in that middle place, open-ended empathy. If you really want to start testing, okay, we've got a point of view that we think our customers should have. As you start testing it, it will be really your second nature to ask questions that confirm it. Do you want to buy a house? Do you want to buy a modular house? Right? Those are hugely confirming questions. A refuting style question is, how do you like renting? So if I'm trying to sell you a house and I ask, how do you like renting? If I get the answer back, oh yeah, it's fine. That's somebody being nice. I suddenly don't get the signal back that, oh, I'm onto something. You get the signal back that I'm not quite onto something yet. So it's a way to put your reality distortion field a little bit in check, which is as you're trying to do the final inquiry into what the real problem is here and testing go-to-market, slightly refute your point of view as you test it with customers and see what comes back. If they push back against you, that's a little bit socially awkward. And so if they're pushing back against you, it's really a problem for them. They're like, I don't care if I'm socially awkward. I don't care if I'm disagreeing with you. I have this problem and I would love for you to solve it. When you get that energy back, that's when you know you're getting closer to getting onto something with your product as well as your go-to-market messaging. So fundamentally, this is about asking, what is the problem? We're here to solve a problem or an aspiration. What is it? The question is combining empathy interviews with a sales demo and sort of how to think about folding those two worlds together. What I recommend is make it clear to the person what your intention is. And your intention at the beginning here should be, I'm not selling you anything, I'm trying to learn from you. And generally what I like to do is set that intention with them and don't cross it. So as you're doing these early interviews, create the social contract. I am here to learn about you. I'm not here to sell you anything. Because as soon as the person thinks that you're selling them something, they think, oh, well, this is pre-negotiation if I want to buy it at some point. So the blast shields go up and the person begins into this kind of preliminary negotiation stance. Now, often what can happen is if you really are onto something and you're asking these open-ended questions, people are leaning in, they're like, would you have a solution for this? Or they really get passionate about it. Then wind up, say, yeah, I'll get to that. I've got an answer for you. Let me wrap up a couple more questions. Because I really want to understand what's going on in your world, and then we'll shift more into what we have to offer. So create a delineation between the empathy gathering point and then the selling point. And then when you hop into selling point, like now you've got the social contract, I'm about to offer you up something or get you really excited about what we're doing, and then pop into that mode. It's partially for them, but it's also really important for you. Because as long as you mentally keep this separation that I'm not selling you right now, it's much easier to stay into the neutral part of questioning. And sometimes you need to sort of get their interest. So often too, it's like, well, do I reach out and say this is a sales call, or do I reach out and say I'm trying to learn more about you? I would encourage you to, if it's a sales call, full on, make it a sales call. If it's an empathy interview, full on, make it an empathy interview. Then, if there's an opportunity to sell, tack that on at the end. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, if you're not getting the vibe that they're into what you're offering, should you stay away from sales mode? You can try sales mode at the very end, but please, whatever you do, don't try to do it in the middle, because if you sort of step into sales mode accidentally, and then they react negatively to that, you pretty much have lost the rest of your time with empathy. So a thing that you can do is if you're sensing they're not into what you're offering, then shift the empathy interview to describing what you're offering, and then go back into empathy interview mode. Again, really curious about why they're not into this. Because again, there's power in the outliers here. So there was one time where I was doing an empathy interview for a product we were building, and we asked a bunch of open-ended questions, and they all kind of started to line up like, okay, this person should be susceptible to what we're doing. She asked, okay, what are you guys building? What are you up to? And I felt enough of the empathy interview was done, so then I shifted to describing what we were building. And she looked at me and she said, that is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. I was like, awesome. I mean, it hurt. And I was like, okay, check that. And I was like, awesome. Why? What about this is challenging? What don't you see value in? And I went back into empathy mode and just let this person rant about how dumb this was. And in that, they're an extreme outlier, but in that we learned a ton about one little nuance of our product that I was like, oh, I didn't even think this sort of side feature thing was utterly offensive to some people. I was like, okay, well, let's not focus on that as much. So it allowed us to tune our product a little bit. So even in hate and sort of disdain for what you're up to, you can still learn a bunch. And usually the emotions are really there, so you can really lean into those emotions. Yeah. Yeah, so when I think about B2B sales especially, Brad Fell sometimes uses the analogy that venture capitalists are like Dungeons and Dragons characters. There is no one common character. I think B2B sales is very similar, which is I'm always trying to figure out and go to market materials for B2B. Okay, what are the different characters you're going to encounter? Usually there's your advocate, the person that really wants you there. There's the person who can say yes. There's the person who can write the check. And this is the most important one in my experience to figure out, who is the saboteur? Who is the person that's lurking in the background that's going to try to undo what you're trying to do? And it can be really powerful to build empathy for each of those characters. So certainly, you're probably initially going to be interviewing your advocate because they're the easiest person to say, hey, will you come spend 20, 30 minutes with me? But I really encourage you to the extent possible, also interview the person who can say yes, the person who can write the check. Sometimes these have to be pretty friendly organizations to get to that person. You can also do it after the fact. After you've landed a couple of customers, try to figure out why in the world did they say yes? Why in the world did they write the check? And then usually the saboteur will still be, running amok even after the company has signed the deal. So you're trying to figure out who that is, what's their motivations, what's going on behind the scenes that's causing them to do that. So in B2B, in any place also in consumer, like where your user and your customer are different people, you want to understand the motivations. You want to build empathy for both sides of that. Now in B2B sales, often really good salespeople are just naturally good at building empathy, understanding where the customer's at, and then very quickly understanding how to navigate around navigate around the blockages and amplify the positive aspects. So you're doing that too, but this is often more focused at the product and the go-to-market level. So if you're thinking B2B, just realize you may not just be doing this with one Dungeons and Dragons character. You may have 4 or 5 you have to do this with. Yeah, so questions around, I've been kind of talking about global empathy. What if you want to learn more about particular features or aspects of a product? So when I think about this, empathy, you can zoom in the empathy. So I've kind of been telling you the framework here for early stage, where you're really trying to figure out the problem. These work in the micro as well. So you can take a feature. Let's say you're adding some add-on feature into your product. Localize the questions to just the perceived need around that feature. Again, always come at it from the need or the problem or the aspiration. It's better not to come at it from the solution. So start, okay, we think this feature is most appropriately aimed at this very specific need. So let's learn about the specific need, go into empathy mode. Then you can switch into, okay, let me show you the feature. Let me understand how you're reacting to it. So then you can kind of go into show mode. But again, come back into open-ended questions. How do you react to that? What can you imagine doing with this feature? What would this solve in your world? Tell me a story about how this feature would save you time or allow you to collaborate better, or whatever dimension you want to get a little bit more nuanced on. Does that help with that? Cool. Got one more. Question is around, how do we know that we're getting the helpful results from our empathy interviews? What I recommend is, so when I teach this at a university level, one of the things the class does is they'll do 50, 70 empathy interviews over the course of part of the semester. And it can be tempting to go out and hammer all 50 at once. We pace it out. So what I recommend that you do is just kind of like in weightlifting, think of reps and sets. So you want to do 10 reps, 4 or 5 sets. So do 10 interviews with a set of questions. Step back, build the light empathy map, look at the problem worksheet or the jobs to be done, synthesize those 10 interviews that you just did, looking for patterns, but also asking yourself the question, is this interview even working? Are we even getting in the neighborhood that we want to get? Retrospect on that, what's working well, what's not working well, what do you want to change about your outreach, about the questions you're asking, about who's doing the interview. Mix that too. Remember I said 2 people doing the interview? So the other person, the person taking notes, isn't just taking notes about the person being interviewed, they're taking notes about the person conducting the interview. What could be different? What could change? You're synthesizing that down too, so that then you can look at the results of the interview as well as the meta notes around the interview, and then go out and do another 10. Refine your interview, go out and do another 10, have those come back, look at them. The other thing that you can do is switch off who's doing the interview. So think about controlling who's doing the interview. This is very often the case where often early stage CEOs can't help themselves but to be in sales mode most of the time. And usually early stage CTOs can't help themselves but want to be in front of the computer the whole time. And so if you switch those roles, it's really interesting. If you get radically different data back, then there's probably a lot of bias that's getting induced by the person doing the interview. So that's another way as you balance these multiple sets of interviews, switch off who's doing the interviews. Yeah, the question is, we're all pretty attached to our solutions. How do we know if we're asking open-ended, or are we sort of unknowingly still in the trap of being very solution biased? There's a couple of things that can be powerful around that, which is you've got mentors around you. Bring your mentors in because they have more beginner's mind around what you're building. You're in a class context. Pair off with each other and review each other's empathy interviews, looking for solution bias, looking for other forms of bias in there, because you have enough awareness of what you're each doing that you can be helpful, but you also are far enough away from the solution that you can really sense, oh wow, this empathy interview is all about the solution and the bias around that. So leverage each other, leverage mentors to help you see what's going to be hard for you to see.
Okay. I just want to point out that on our website under the Techstars Toolkit, you'll see the series of worksheets that are available to you. You can fill these out, go through this process. I know it's there's more to it than just filling out a form, but I did want to let you know that you have a lot of this material is available to you. So let's see here. Okay, so this is actually an area that is it could easily be a semester, just this one aspect. And I've struggled with how to best do this for you. And because of the format, the best thing I think I can do is just point you to it, and you can kind of adopt it, because all our companies are so different in the stage they're at and so forth. But what he's really getting to the heart of, which is product market fit. What is your market connection, if you will? And he goes through this whole, I think, in a very kind of interesting way, the difference between push and pull. This is a really important concept. When I was a marketing major in college, everything I was taught was related to push. All of the case studies were giant corporations trying to sell, on a national basis, had to do with, TV ads, all the, kind of the way it used to be. And he makes a really great case and said, really, there isn't just 3 networks anymore. There's a million. And the product it needs to be pulled out of your hands, as opposed to you pushing it into their hands. That's a fundamental change in business processes that, it's kind of hard to understand that, because if you've lived it, it just seemed like it's the way it's always been. But the idea of engaging with potential customers, opinion leaders, there's all different kinds of players in the marketplace. I would just encourage you to give some thought to, even if it's a small subset, a particular group, getting people to respond to your product, particularly if you've been doing this for a while. He used the example of, doing 10 interviews and going back and kind of digesting it, and then maybe going out and do 10 more with some things that you've learned. But I think it would be really interesting for those of you who have been doing this for a while. Maybe you're stuck in a loop of believing your own bullshit, right? That you just keep saying the same thing because it feels right. I would challenge you to really see if that's true. If the features that you're promoting, if the positioning you're promoting, is it really as good as it could be? Are you getting the kind of velocity that you would get if you connected with a really important problem? So this is a really big area. Like I said, there's a lot to it, and you can always go back and watch these videos. There's a whole bunch of information out there if you want to look into this so-called lean business canvas. That's a whole thing. It's kind of like a new way of doing a business plan. It also is a whole semester normally of just that alone. But there's tons of tools and ways to use some of that stuff to help you, get a handle on where you're at and where you'd like to go. And the other thing that I wanted to kind of highlight is this idea of bias. When you ask questions or you have what you believe to be the truth about your product or service, I think he's making the point that you may well have a bias in there that is not necessarily reading the market right. You may have an opinion or a thought that's just a little bit out of whack with the real marketplace. So there's different ways to do that, but I think it's well worth giving some thought to you, especially those of you who've been doing this for a while and maybe you're flatlining a little bit, or it's not growing, it's not kind of taking off. Not to say every business has to take off, but just aligning this product market fit is such an important part. And the fact that you don't have to necessarily push everything, that if people can discover you and pull it from you, that's a good place to be, especially for any consumer product that might be. So with that, I'll open it up. Anybody wants to chat about it or thoughts that they have. Sana?
Hi. Okay, so I'll talk about my experience with the product market fit. When I first started, with the egg kits, I was targeting people that were like me, in my situation, corporate jobs, little kids, possibly no time, and they're in a rush and they just, they want to have their breakfast ready. So that's who I was targeting, and it would have been a perfect fit for me. So I thought, how could it not be a perfect fit for them? It's so easy, they have to love my product. So I don't know still that maybe I haven't been able to market it properly to that segment yet, because I've actually found my market in a different segment, and that's elderly, senior citizens, people who are maybe dealing with some kind of illness that they cannot really go and cook a lot, and, do a lot of cutting and chopping. So my first year, I think it was, if I recall correctly, 65 to 70% of my sales actually came from people that were 55 plus, and 80% of them were females, which is not what I was targeting. But I was like, okay, that's my new segment, I'm gonna roll with that. It's been 2 years, that's still my largest segment. And again, I don't know if it's because I haven't been able to get my message across to people like myself. I mean, they buy, but that's not the majority. So I guess I need to do some work there.
This is thank you for sharing that. It's such an important thing. Remember in the video where he was trying to buy a drill bit, and he's looking at all the drill bits, and some were black and some were shiny or whatever, and he said, if somebody just said this drill bit will safely drill a hole in your finished cabinet or whatever, he would have bought it even if it cost 10 times as much. And what Sana is sharing here, and thank you for doing this, is really an example of what we're talking about, right? That even though you may have an opinion as to, or even your goal was to sell to people like yourself in Sana's case, but hey, it turned out to be a completely different population. So this is a great example, and I think also what's important to do is and please, everyone knows I don't pick on anybody, but just to think about, does your marketing message talk to your primary audience, or is it just been assimilated by them because it meets their needs so overwhelmingly? So have some person like my age on the cover, or of course or an older woman. That's just an example. That could be a social media campaign. It could be a live video aimed at that audience. You could do something with a fundraiser for a senior group or something, blah blah blah. So I think that's a great lesson for all of us, Sana, and thank you for sharing that. All right, anyone else?
Yeah, I kind of had the kind of something similar I'm working on right now. So I'm working on my spices, and I thought that they were no sugar, low sodium, no MSG, that's going to be what people are wanting. But as I'm doing my market research, I'm actually finding that people are liking the fact that it's simple, it's all in one bottle, and it tastes great. So it's not even, they're actually saying that they like that it's no sugar, and they like those things, but that's not really the main thing. And I've had several customers tell me that, but now my goal is I've got to narrow it down a little bit more, because I'm really trying to find my ideal customer. And that is absolutely challenging. So now I'm doing some samplings today, and I'm going to actually drill down a little bit more, just kind of as I'm talking to people, and just see what are some other things that that are characteristics to them and why they like it. But yeah, it's a challenge. It could be totally something that you did not think was what they would go for.
That's a really great, another really good example. One of the things that you can do that, and if this is already, common knowledge, I apologize. But when you're talking, particularly doing sampling or you're talking to someone in person and you ask them a question because you want to know the answer. One little technique that I was taught when I was younger was to let them finish their answer and then ask them exactly this way. In addition to X, is there any other thing you want to tell me about this? And what happens is they will tell you what they really think with the second question. In addition to that, in addition to it being fast or in addition to it being tasty, is there anything else you want to tell me? And it's a famous kind of taught thing in business school, at least where I was. It's remarkable over the year. I could tell you stories of what actually comes out of people's mouths once they feel like, number one, they answer in a way they think you want to hear.
You want to hear it, yeah.
And then the second one is what they really think. And sometimes it even takes a third attempt to do that. But I do think that this whole idea of customer interview, of questioning, I don't like the word customer interview because I think it sounds like you're applying for a job, but this really is talking and communicating and learning some of these techniques about how to get to the bottom of what's really being described or discussed is a really critical skill that you can learn. And this technique, and it's literally in addition to, and state what they said, in addition to it tasting good, is there anything else you'd like to tell me about this product or that you wish it did, or however you want to phrase it. But the key word is in addition, allows people to have their response accepted by you, but at the same time, open them up to, to a further dialogue that might get to the heart of what they really think. And I think in the interview there, or in the video, Jack Nees, who's a kind of a famous guy in Techstars, long story, but he's just a star instructor. He talked about the woman that thought his idea was the dumbest idea she ever heard. That's a perfect example of, okay, I'll tell you what I think about your product, but here's what I really think. And so that's a really good example of really getting to the heart of the matter. And so anyway, this is a really important part, and I don't want to underemphasize it, but at the same time, we don't have the format really to really go as far as you might want to go with this. Any of you who want to interview me or ask me questions or pitch me any of this stuff, I'm happy to do that. I'm sure Grant would do it, so don't hesitate if you want to bounce some stuff off. I'll tell you. I can pretend customer, and I can also tell you what I really think. So just to let you know, I'm happy to do that. So anyone else? Okay. All right. Hopefully I'm not freezing up like I did yesterday. I apologize for that. The Monday is going to be a pretty good day, I think, for everybody. For those of you who have heard Andy Galinsky before, you do not want to miss it. We're going to have some guests also that will be in the class. They may ask you questions. This is the entrepreneurship program from Penn State. They're going to be sitting in, so they may. I'm going to give them the freedom to ask anybody a question if they want. But that's what's up for Monday, and then next week we're going to get into, for some of you already know, but some of you who don't, the whole idea of what category are you in? What category is your product or your service? And I think you'll be surprised by some of the things you'll learn in that process that you may not have heard before. So I'm excited about that. It's always one of my favorite category design, and that whole idea of creating a whole new category for your product is always very appealing to me. So any other questions or feedback at this point?
Yeah, is Monday going to be a different link to the Zoom meeting, or the same link, just 9 o'clock?
Yeah, same link.
Okay.
I hope. Right, Grant? If not, be prepared for a flurry of emails with, but as far as I know, with the way our system works, I've actually purchased this URL from Zoom. So supposedly
Oh, okay.
it's mine, forever. It's a pretty weird URL in my opinion. But anyway, it says Accelerate Rural in it, so it's supposed to be just ours. So we'll see. Hopefully that'll be true. All right. Well, any other thoughts, questions? Con, we can't hear you. Are you talking, Con?
Talking to myself. I do it on the daily.
Yeah.
But no, it's all good. We're looking forward to next week for sure. And it's been a great week this week. So awesome. Appreciate you guys.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. And we'll see you on Monday.
Thanks, Dennis.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.